So, I'd like to welcome you to another Discord stage debate. This time we are discussing, is abortion immoral? We have young baby Tate taking the affirmative against Crispr, Cas9 taking the opposite of the affirmative. I'm going to leave it at that, and I will leave it up to the two of you to have a fantastic debate.
Awesome. Thanks. Just let me know when you're starting the timer. Okay, cool. Starting now. All right, I'm not much of a guy for opening statements. I'm more of a Socratic kind of guy, prefer the dialogue part of the debate, but I'll give it my best shot. Tonight, we are debating the topic of whether abortion is immoral. Um, that title's a bit vague. My opponent has specifically asked me tonight to defend the proposition direct and intentional abortion of a living unborn human is always immoral. So I'd start by giving an argument in favor of this proposition. The first premise of the argument is that it is always wrong to directly and intentionally kill an innocent human person. Hopefully, most of you already agree with that premise. That's a pretty uncontroversial premise. The second premise is that unborn human beings are innocent persons. I would initially defend this premise by stating that I believe in human equality. Anytime in history that we've ever tried to exclude certain members of the human family from being persons, for instance, during the time of slavery or when we used to consider women less than persons, we've always made a horrible mistake, and I'm afraid that we might be doing that again. The third premise of the argument is that most abortions directly and intentionally kill an unborn human being. And that leads to the conclusion that any abortion that directly and intentionally kills an innocent human being is wrong. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to clear up any potential confusions or misconceptions. Here's what I'm not here to argue today. I'm not here to argue that anyone who has had an abortion is automatically morally equivalent to a murderer. We always need to distinguish between the wrongness of an action versus, the kind of moral responsibility that someone who committed the action holds. Many women who face crisis pregnancies are under a kind of intense emotional coercion, or sometimes even like a literal coercion from a partner. And so it's always hard to assess the culpability of women in that scenario. I'm personally of the opinion that only abortion providers should be punished for providing abortions. So I don't think that, like, for instance, we should be throwing women in jail or something like that if it were to be the case that abortion was outlawed. My only aim would be to remove abortion as a legal option for parents who were seeking them out. I'm also not here to argue that we should only care about human beings in utero, or that we should ignore the needs of the mother and forget about them both once the child is born. Pro-lifers seriously should be supporting charities like the March of Dimes, which helps young pregnant mothers, as well as charities like, say, the Elizabeth House in California, which supports young and new mothers with children up to age 5. I'm also a fan of welfare programs like WIC and food stamps since they support mothers and their children who are struggling to take care of themselves. I'm also not here to argue that natural miscarriages, treatments for ectopic pregnancies, or dilation and curettage procedures for the treatment of miscarriages are immoral. Natural miscarriages involve the natural death of the human embryo or fetus. The natural death of any child is tragic, but the parent would never be held morally responsible for that. Treatments for ectopic pregnancies is something that we will probably be getting into during the course of this debate. But for now, I'll just cite a philosophical paper called The Ethics of Ectopic Pregnancy, a critical reconsideration of salpingostomy and methotrexate by Dr. Christopher Kazor, for anyone who's interested. Dilation and curettage procedures are simply a form of corpse removal and prevention of infection for the mother who experienced the miscarriage. All right. With those sort of misconceptions out of the way, let's move on to some potential objections to my arguments. One possible objection is, why do you care? Come on, let people do what they want. And I think the answer to that is that the topic of abortion is a really high-stakes issue. If the pro-choicers are correct and the unborn aren't human persons worthy of human rights, then pro-lifers are needlessly oppressing women, and pro-lifers are seriously in the wrong. But if the pro-life side is right and the unborn are innocent human beings worthy of rights, then we have one of the most serious moral crises of our time, because hundreds of thousands of innocent human persons would be being killed every single year if the pro-lifer is right. Another potential objection would simply be to say that abortion is a human right or abortion is healthcare. But this assumes what the pro-choice side needs to prove. So I don't think that this is a forceful objection. Another possible objection is, why are two men talking about this issue? And I think the answer to that would simply be that I will never be a victim of college rape culture. I'm a man. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't speak out against it. A moral issue doesn't need to personally affect you in order for you to have an opinion on it. I may never be able to get pregnant, but that doesn't change the fact that I could state a proposition: abortion is wrong. And that statement would either be true or false. Another potential objection is that we need to uphold the separation of church and state. First of all, I'm not making any legal claims here tonight. Second of all, I will not be bringing up abortion tonight. So I don't think that you need not abortion. Oh my gosh. I will be bringing up abortion, but I will not be bringing up religion tonight. I don't think you need to be religious to be against abortion. Another potential objection is that legalizing abortion will send us back to the 50s, featuring coat hangers, death by stairs, and back alley abortions. For now, we can get into the details later if Crispr wants to talk about this topic, but I'll just point out that the former director of Planned Parenthood in the 1960s, Dr. Mary S. Calderon, pointed out herself that abortion, even illegal abortion, was no longer considered a dangerous procedure. And this is because illegal abortions, both now and before Roe v. Wade, are performed by doctors. They're not performed by random people in back alleys. Another potential objection is that the unborn are not human persons. Now, I think this is a strong objection, and it's an objection worth exploring. I don't know whether Crispr plans to make this objection tonight, but if he wants to explore that during the open dialogue, he can. He can try to give different reasons for why the unborn should not be considered human persons. Another strong objection is to say that the right to life is not the same as the right to use someone else's body. So even if the unborn do have a right to life, that doesn't mean that they have a right to use the pregnant woman's body. Now, I could rebut this initially, but again, for the sake of time, we'll wait to see if this is an objection that Crispr wants to bring up later tonight. Another possible objection, and I think this may be the objection that Crispr is going to try and bring up tonight, is that it isn't always wrong to directly and intentionally kill an innocent human person. So this would actually be disputing premise 1 of my argument. I hope that objecting to this premise would make some people uncomfortable, but let's give this argument a fair shake. Some exceptions would seem to include self-defense, civilian casualties during wartime, and procedures which save the life of a pregnant mother, but result in the death of an unborn fetus. It appears that maybe these are cases of directly and intentionally killing an innocent human person that aren't wrong. But all of these actions can be morally justified without rejecting the principle that it's always wrong to directly and intentionally kill an innocent human person. These actions are justifiable because of a moral principle called double effect. Essentially, it's the principle of self-defense. For example, if someone is putting my life in danger, I can use violent force to prevent them from attacking me, even if I foresee they could die as a result, so long as I'm not intending to directly kill them. The goal isn't to murder my attacker, but to protect myself from serious harm. We can know this because if I shoot him in the shoulder and he's rushed to the hospital, I would never be justified in following to the hospital and shooting him again. But it's important to note that the aim of most abortion procedures is to directly and intentionally kill the unborn embryo or fetus. Vacuum aspiration abortions terminate the pregnancy by crushing the embryo through a plastic tube with a high-powered vacuum. And dilation and curettage abortions and dilation and evacuation abortions involve the intentional and physical dismemberment of the embryo or fetus prior to removal in order to terminate the pregnancy. Abortion by medication seems to involve indirect killing since it's more of an expulsion of the embryo from the uterus than it is some kind of a direct attack on the embryo. However, more thought reveals this doesn't hold up. If it's wrong for me to kill my 3-year-old daughter by merely removing her from an environment where the only environment where she's able to survive by, let's say, strapping her to a rocket and shooting her into space, then it would seem to also be wrong for me to intentionally kick out my unborn daughter from the only place she can survive in by giving my wife an abortion pill. These are both still examples of an direct and intentional killing.
Thank you very much for
And
that opening
leave it.
statement. We will move on to CRISPR. 10 minutes starts now.
All right, so thanks for having the debate. Going to try to move through this as quickly as I can. When I agreed to the debate, it was to a specific proposition. I think that specific propositions are given in debates and should be defended. That was already laid out, but I'll restate it. Direct and intentional abortion of a living unborn human is always immoral. That is the debate challenge at hand, the proposition to be defended. And if my opponent abandons that proposition or fails to defend that proposition specifically, then I think that is a concession. The key word in that proposition is always, always immoral. So a single counterexample causes the proposition to fail. Ectopic pregnancies are living unborn humans. Without abortion, they will result in catastrophic and often fatal harm to the mother. These never have any chance of viability, but they are, in fact, living unborn humans, and the abortion done to them is as direct and intentional as any other. If you talk about medicative abortions, it is a direct and intentional. If that is a direct and intentional abortion, then so is the abortion in the case of an ectopic pregnancy. Now, what we might end up doing is effectively defining the meaning of direct and intentional in such a narrow fashion that what counts is nothing. I would see that also as a concession. If we end up removing medication abortions from consideration as immoral, and medication abortions count for, let's say, at least 50%, possibly, and could be as much as 80%, 80 as much as 80% fit into the guidelines of what is approved for medicative abortions. If we're removing 80% off the bat, you're defining it in such a narrow sense that it effectively ceases to exist. I would view that as a concession of the terms of the debate. Um, so I think that for my opponent to be successful, what we'll need to see is a defense of the immorality, that is, defending the proposition that ectopic abortion is immoral, and simultaneously a defense of the position that medication abortion truly is different from ectopic abortion. I think that effectively anything outside of that is an evasion from the critical question. Um, and I will come to my defense of that position as we get to it. So I think that lays out what needs to be done. Immorality of abortion in the case of ectopic pregnancies, uh, or a demonstration that ectopic pregnancies truly are different, and importantly, why they are different. So I think that wraps up my opening, and good luck with that.
Alrighty, thank you for a very quick opening. I will reset the timer. What did you guys think? About six to start with 60 minutes of open discussion and see where we're at from there, or did somebody have a hard limit?
I don't have a hard limit tonight.
Okay,
Nope, good to go.
let's start with 60 minutes and discuss away, gentlemen.
So I think that the opening question then is, mifepristone does not result in the direct killing of the unborn. It causes uterine bleeding, allows the embryo to be washed out. This is very similar to what is done in the case of methotrexate injection for medication abortion for ectopic pregnancies. You need a different drug because of the differences of where the of implantation. It's not quite the same thing, so you need slightly different treatment. But ultimately, the intent and consequence are the same. And that is to say, the intent is to terminate the pregnancy. The consequence is that the embryo is flushed from the woman's body. So I think that if we can't show those to be different, then you're going to be forced into a position where you have to defend ectopic abortion as immoral.
So I'm going to start by just giving a brief definition of uh, how I would view the term abortion for the sake of our discussion. I would consider an abortion to be the intentional termination of a pregnancy which directly results in the death of the unborn human. So that would be the way that I wouldn't just define abortion so broadly as to imply any kind of termination at all of a pregnancy, since something like live births, miscarriages, uh, etc., those would be abortions under the broader definition. For the sake of this discussion, I prefer to define abortion in this kind of more narrow way, since that seems to be the kind of abortion that's in dispute tonight.
Well,
Um,
that almost sounds like you're trying to define you're sort of it sounds like you're sort of trying to define abortion as those acts that you consider immoral, right? At which point you're sort
well,
of assuming the thing that you're trying to demonstrate, which is not really a valid move in argument.
okay, so let's. No, I would say that I am trying to. What's the word I'm looking for? I made an argument in favor of my position. I'm not simply trying to define abortion into a place where it's automatically immoral. I would say that any abortion that is the direct and intentional killing of an unborn human being would be immoral for the reasons of premise 1 and 2. So, a direct and intentional abortion of a living unborn human, if abortion means the termination of a pregnancy which results in the death of the embryo, then I don't think I'm defining, because I think it could be the case, for instance, that you can terminate a pregnancy in a way that results in the death of the embryo, but it's not direct, or it's not intentional, or it's neither, in which case that kind of termination would not be immoral. So, when it comes to what you talked about with mifepristone, I believe is the name of the drug, the medication abortion, the
It's one
abortion
of the
pill.
common ones, yes.
Yeah. So, in the case of a medicated abortion, I am skeptical of the claim that it is a kind of indirect killing or a kind of unintentional killing. But even if I were to concede that it's some kind of indirect killing, under my principle that I've tried to defend here tonight of double effect, I would say that certain kinds of indirect killing would also be seriously immoral. Now, for the purposes of defending the proposition, I don't have to elaborate any further on that, but I can if you want me to.
Well, so now it seems like what's happening is that that the double effect, when double effect applies is when you consider the cause of the action to be moral, right?
Okay, so the way that I would outline the principle of double effect is that um, the direct action that you are taking should not be in itself intrinsically immoral. And then the the evil effect must be an indirect side effect of that direct action. The evil effect must not be intention in the evil effect should not be intended, and there needs to be a seriously proportionate reason for allowing the evil effect to take place. In layman's
Right.
terms, to give the
So
kind of
Well, no, it's just that if what you're saying is if the intention is moral, then it doesn't count under what you're defining abortion as, right? And
Um,
because of double effect.
no, because I would say that the evil effect should not be a what's the word I'm looking for? Intending something evil would include both desiring it as an ends or as a means. So, for instance, if killing someone is a means, if murdering someone is a means for me to get $3 million, you could argue that my direct intention technically was just to get $1 million, and there's nothing wrong with getting $1 million. But I am directly intending to kill someone as a means. I would say that the death of the unborn fetus or embryo would have to be an unintended side effect. It can't be either some kind of directly instrumental means or the
Well, but
actual intended ends.
it's direct in the sense that we know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah,
Um,
but there's a difference between foreseeing an outcome and intending an outcome.
well, I know, but I'm trying to set up an analogy between ectopic pregnancy and medication abortion, right? Um, and so we're trying to figure out what the distinction is between those two. Now, now I would say that the intent for every abortion is to terminate the pregnancy, right? Now you can argue about what the reasons why somebody wants to terminate the pregnancy is, but the point is the intent is not to kill the embryo or the
See, but
fetus.
I'm actually kind of skeptical that this is always the case. For instance,
But it doesn't need to always be the case. It needs to ever be the case.
well, no, because the proposition is that direct and intentional abortion of a living unborn human is always wrong.
Right.
Well,
But
okay, so hold on. Maybe I see what you're getting at, but I can even grant this and move forward. I just figured I'd like kind of plant my feet in the sand, like lay down my line in the sand and say that I'm already skeptical of this.
sure. So the point of all of this is that if you are outlining that a medication abortion with methotrexate in the case of an ectopic pregnancy is allowable, right? You're basically trying to say, well, that doesn't count as abortion as we're defining abortion, right? Because it's indirect and because the intention is not to kill the unborn, right? But my point is that when somebody takes mifepristone in order to terminate their pregnancy, a medication pregnancy, they are doing that, in fact, to terminate their pregnancy. They're not doing it to kill the unborn. They're doing it to no longer be pregnant, right?
Okay, so two
And it's
things.
not direct. It's not directly killing it either, right? It's allowing it to be flushed, just like methotrexate allows it to be flushed in the case of
Sure.
ectopic
Okay.
pregnancy.
So two things. I can actually grant both of those things and still successfully defend my proposition for tonight. For instance, I could just simply concede that the use of methotrexate to treat ectopic pregnancies is immoral and that ectopic pregnancies should be treated by way of something like a salpingectomy, and then I can try and lay out the double effect reasonings for why that's a legitimate action. I do think I'm leaning towards the view that methotrexate can also be defended using double effect, but it really involves getting into the moral weeds. I would rather just kind of cite you the work of Dr. Christopher Kaiser for today. And if you find
Yeah.
that to be an unsatisfactory answer, then I suppose I could just grant it and say, okay, fine, methotrexate is immoral then. My
Okay.
premise is still defended though.
Well,
And
except
then with regards to mifepristone, I could also say, okay, fine, it's not a direct killing of the unborn. But I could still, for separate reasons, say this is still an immoral action because I think that some indirect killings are still immoral. But for the purposes of this debate, I would still be successfully defending my premise. If you want, I can go into why I think that there is a serious moral difference For instance, I could ask you a question by giving you a scenario if you're interested.
Sure.
Okay. Let's say there's a mother named Martha living in her country cabin during some kind of, really extreme weather event. Let's say like a severe blizzard or a flash flood. You pick your deadly weather event, right? Martha has a 3-year-old son named Ollie. While they're in the house, Ollie finds one of his grandpa's old war hand grenades, and he inadvertently activates it, and he's gripping the hand grenade. If he lets go, him and his mother will both die. Do you think there's a moral difference between Martha pushing her 3-year-old son, Ollie, who is now holding a live bomb, out into the blizzard, versus if there was no bomb and Martha was just pushing him out into the deadly blizzard for some other less serious reason?
Sure.
Okay. So would you hold that if Martha wanted to push her 3-year-old child out into like a deadly blizzard or a flash flood for some other reason that doesn't have to do with her life being immediately in danger, that would be immoral, even if she could like maybe argue in court, well, it wasn't a direct killing, it's the blizzard that killed him.
You could do that, certainly. The issue is that the question is, what is the reason for the act, right? And again, the reason for the act in the case of abortion is to terminate the pregnancy,
Sure, but I
not
guess
to
what I
kill
would
the unborn.
sure, but I guess what I would say is that even if your intention isn't to kill the unborn, taking an action that deprives an innocent human being of the only environment in which they're able to survive could only be justifiable if your life was in danger.
I disagree with that.
Okay. Could
I
you
think that I think that the right of bodily autonomy takes precedence and priority over effectively anything else.
anything else?
I think that if if somebody kidnapped you, right, and they had you and they were holding you against your will, right,
Yeah,
it would be viable for you to use lethal force to escape them, even though they never threatened your life, right? They just weren't going to let you go.
I would say that
I'm stating a fact on my own position.
sure. I would say that like minimum force necessary. So if lethal force is necessary, then sure. I
Exactly
think that
so.
can be defended under double
No,
effect. Yeah.
I very much appreciate that what the qualifier that you put in there, that the minimum force necessary to defend your bodily autonomy is what is justifiable. And I
Okay.
agree. I agree to that.
So now I think
However,
we're kind
the
of
minimum force necessary to defend your bodily autonomy in the case of a pregnancy generally results not as the intended effect, but as the unfortunate consequence in the death of the unborn.
okay. So I'm glad we've kind of reached this point because that does mean now we're kind of away from this kind of initial narrow aim of kind of going after one very specific part of my premise. Now it seems like the deeper issue for you would be that you think that abortion is moral because for reasons having to do with the bodily autonomy of the woman.
I think
I'm
it's morally
assuming
permissible,
right, yeah.
not
So,
morally required, obviously.
well yeah, I obviously I agree with that. Yeah, someone can always offer like let's say a kidney to someone if, they feel so inclined. So, all right, so would you like to move on to discussing bodily autonomy then?
If that's where you want to go with it, sure.
Sure. So, I guess I would say that I mean, I think that bodily autonomy is one of the stronger arguments against the uh the immorality of abortion. I guess so. I guess I could retool this scenario and say that Martha snowed into her cabin potentially for months and months. You know what? Actually, maybe I have a better example. A principle that I'm going to try and tease out here would be that I think that parents have a basic obligation to provide ordinary care to their children or to entrust that person or to entrust their child to someone who can provide them with ordinary care. Would You agree with that?
Yes, but importantly in that is the capacity to entrust the child with somebody else, right? And so if there is no way to entrust the child with somebody else, and there's no other way that you can take care of yourself, right? Your own well-being will take priority. It is
Do you think that
morally
pregnant women
permissible,
can't
is
take care of
morally
themselves?
permissible, sorry, is morally permissible for you to prioritize your own well-being if there is no other way. If there is another way, that should be pursued, right? But the thing about a born child versus an unborn child is that the born child can be given to somebody else to care for, whereas the unborn child is intrinsically limited to the mother's body, right? So
Okay,
if
so
if she wishes to put forward her right of bodily autonomy, there's nothing that can be done.
okay, I'm glad you brought this up because it's going to make the kind of point of this scenario that I'm going to bring up a lot more clear. Alice is a Alice is a woman who has recently undergone a tragic stillbirth. Because of that tragic stillbirth, she is still able to lactate for the time being. Alice is also a climate researcher who spends a lot of time at a lab in Antarctica. She is off to Antarctica for let's say, a 7-month period of research at a remote lab. Her boss is there also, and he says to her, "Hey, man, I heard about your stillbirth, your miscarriage. I'm really sorry to hear about that. It looks like there's a snowstorm coming, so I'm gonna get out of here." And then Alice's boss does something very perverse. He says, "I know you've been having such a hard time, so I decided I'd give you a gift. Ta-da! It's a newborn. You have a new son now. Anyways, I'll see you." And then he leaves. And the snowstorm rolls in. Alice is trapped. Now Alice is lactating. She's able to allow this newborn to use her body, to give up her bodily autonomy in order for this newborn to survive. However, if she wants to preserve her bodily autonomy, she could always just chuck this newborn out into the blizzard. Do you think it's
Well,
morally permissible for
so
her to chuck the newborn
I,
out into a blizzard?
you see the immediate problem with what you've done, right? Do you need me to correct it, or can you correct it on your own?
Um, I mean, without being condescending, please feel free to correct it.
So you said chuck it into the blizzard. Is that the analogy?
I
Is
could say
that what you want to
gently
go
set
with
it
here?
into the blizzard, or even just
Why are
allow
you
it to
setting it
starve,
into the blizzard at all?
or just allow it to starve. That's fine too.
So, yeah, so the thing is that you could say that it is morally laudable for her to care for this infant, right? But I think that the appropriate thing for her to do would be to maintain her own health as best as possible, maintain her own safety as best as possible. And if she's now just been trapped by someone, her mind is now not really necessarily uh, needs to be focused on some infant when obviously the real problem is whoever put her in that situation. Now, you can say that in your mind, you think it's always, a requirement that if you can put your life on the line, then it must be done. But then you have the problem where I can say, you've
Well,
got a perfectly good
it's
kidney
not
you're not
putting her
using.
life in
Oh,
line.
well, hold on. I'm almost done. You've got a perfectly good kidney you're not using. I should be able to take it so I can save somebody else's life.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought this up. So I think this kind of gets into an important distinction, right? My case was that parents should be obligated to provide the ordinary care due to their children. Now, in this particular case, I've actually made it even more interesting because this isn't technically her child at all. This is just someone that has been randomly placed within her care. So this could actually apply also to rape cases. Now, I want to obviously immediately caveat that by saying I'm not trying to trivialize rape. Just for the sake of this discussion, we're talking about moral philosophy. It can kind of come off as calloused. Obviously, rape is horrible. Anyways, to get back to my point, um, parents should provide the some ordinary care to their children. Would you say that breastfeeding is ordinary care for a newborn and not some kind of extraordinary care, like, say, donating a kidney to somebody?
I think that the receipt of a kidney is the ordinary care in the case where you need a kidney.
Um,
So the receipt, it's not about what is what's being given up. It's about what's being received, right? And so the ordinary care for somebody who needs a kidney is to get a kidney.
well, so for instance, the reason why I point out ordinary care versus extraordinary care is like, let's say your kid has cancer. You don't have access to like, maybe you can't afford like the kind of cutting edge immunotherapy that's required for this child to receive cancer. I don't think that you have an obligation to like essentially move like turn the world over to make sure that the child can receive what in your own words would be ordinary care. When I say ordinary care, I mean providing what whatever ordinary means a child would need for, like, say, food, shelter, you know, warmth, etc. Whatever's required for it to continue developing normally as a healthy person, right? When we start talking about when someone is sick, we're kind of in a different territory. But to kind of, again, to ask you a question, are you conceding that Alice doesn't have like a moral obligation to make use of her body to feed this newborn?
I certainly don't think that there's a moral obligation on a woman who's been forced into a scenario against her will to provide any level of care to anybody else.
What
And in
if
fact,
Alice
I
was
think
her
that
child, actually?
what?
What if Alice is her child? Or what if this newborn is Alice's child? Sorry.
So I think then that the immorality had already happened when the infant was taken to Antarctica, where it would be forced into that scenario.
Well, I mean, so we could also just take it back to a snowed-in cabin, a landslide, some kind of avalanche occurs. Rescuers aren't going to be able to get to her for, I don't know, 2 months. It's happened before. She has enough food. She's lactating. Does she have a moral obligation to make use of her body in order to sustain the life of her own child?
I would think I would think that ultimately bodily autonomy is sacrosanct. I think that if you're in the
Okay.
situation where where you don't have a way of providing alternative care to a child, then forcing somebody to use their body to support somebody else against their will is not morally required.
All right. I'm Yeah, I'm done with that. You pretty much bit all the bullets that I wanted you to. We can move on to a different topic if you're interested. Different lines of
Well,
discussion regarding this
well,
debate.
the important line of questioning is I think, right, if one says that, just for the moment, go with it, that bodily autonomy is in fact sacrosanct, right? Would that then constitute a valid uh, application of double effect for medication abortion?
I mean, if bodily autonomy is sacrosanct, although I think the bullets that you're having to bite are so intense that I would consider them to be reductio ad absurdums. I would hope that most other compassionate people would consider that to be a reductio ad absurdum too. I'm not trying to attack you. Um, I'm just saying that I think everything that you've claimed is kind of proof that bodily autonomy isn't actually sacrosanct. when it comes to talking about moral philosophy, at a certain point, we kind of end up just saying, well, surely that's immoral, so we need to retool our ethical framework. If an ethical framework that someone devises leads to seemingly horrifying conclusions, like saying that it's morally permissible for a mother to starve her newborn child, then I think something's wrong with the ethical framework.
I didn't hear an answer to the question in that.
Okay, sorry, could you? Well, yeah, I did answer the question at the beginning. If it is the case that bodily autonomy is sacrosanct, then sure. But I
Okay,
think that everything that you've kind of said is strong evidence that bodily autonomy isn't sacrosanct. I think that's kind of where I'd leave that.
sure. So at that point, though, it feels like now you have to go against bodily autonomy, at which point I'm just going to point out the fact that if you have a functioning kidney, you need to give it up.
Um, Again, I think I would kind of go back to I think that bodily autonomy
Or
obviously does
blood.
have
Let's just
some.
go with blood. Why a
Sure,
kidney?
I
Blood.
think that bodily autonomy has a place within a moral framework, right? So, for instance, I'm not required to make use of my body in some kind of extraordinary way in order to save someone that I have no moral obligation towards. If someone's sick, one, that's not my fault. Two, my blood is for my body, my kidney is for my body. So the relevant question is, what are breasts for? What is the uterus for?
Oh, so that really sounds like you're making women into vessels and
No,
not people.
that's really not what I'm trying to say at all. But I would say that the uterus is a vessel.
I would say that the uterus is part of a woman's body.
That's true. I mean, I would say that my hands are tools, but that doesn't mean that I'm a tool, right? Do you see that? Do you see the distinction? I can understand how it sounds like I might be saying that women are a vessel, but I don't think that. Women are people, men are people, and I think that the unborn are people too.
Yeah, so I don't feel the need to argue for or against the status of the unborn. And you may have noticed that I don't in this. So
Yeah,
the issue is that if you have um, the embryo or fetus that can only use the woman's body, I would say that it is extraordinary care for her to spend 9 months of her life using her body to develop the embryo, develop the fetus, develop the unborn person, whatever you want to say. I would say that is fairly extraordinary care, right? And the fact that people do it is, of course, laudable. I
I
wouldn't
agree.
argue against that, but to say it's not extraordinary care, I think is excessive. I think that that goes further than I'd be willing to go. I
Do
think
you
that
think
it
that
isn't.
do you think that other kinds of ordinary care for children can often be very strenuous, difficult, and long-lasting and have long-lasting effects on people?
Certainly some can,
Okay,
and
so the
and
fact
I
that
think that
pregnancy is strenuous doesn't seem alone to be a good reason to say that
well,
it's
except that
an extraordinary
except
form of care.
except that there's this very important distinction, right? Which is that all of those other forms of care that you're discussing are transferable, and pregnancy is not.
Okay, so in the case of the mother in the cabin, something like breastfeeding also isn't transferable. So it sounds like
Could be
again,
transferred
we're
to
kind of in
formula.
well, she doesn't have formula.
See, you see how you're generating uh, circumstances,
Yeah,
right?
that's the way thought experiments work.
Where where you've narrowed it down so much, right? That yeah, the the bodily imposition of providing of breastfeeding, you would agree is lower than the bodily imposition of pregnancy, right?
Sure. So again, the point of these thought experiments is not to like say, well, only in this scenario, then what about in this scenario? What about in this scenario? It's more about pointing out the fact that these principles aren't holding up. So, for instance, let me try and regather everything that you said here. So you said that, well, breastfeeding isn't as strenuous. Yeah, sure, but we already agreed that a form of care that's strenuous doesn't automatically make it extraordinary. Breastfeeding is also making use
I
of
actually
the
didn't
woman's
agree to that.
body. Hmm?
I
Well, I mean,
actually didn't agree to that.
you did actually, because I
No,
asked you, and I mean, maybe you disagree now, but I'll just point out that when I
no,
asked you, do you
I
think
said
that
that,
some forms of ordinary care that are very strenuous for children could still be considered ordinary care? Like, for
and
instance,
what did I
working
say
overtime
the
for
distinction
3
was?
years.
What did I say the distinction was?
Sure, that it's the difference is that pregnancy involves making use of someone's body.
No, that's not what I
Okay,
said that
so that
the
the care is
distinction was,
transferable.
that's right. So you can say that some acts of ordinary care are in fact very strenuous, but those acts are transferable,
What
right?
if they're so
Whereas
what about in
pregnancy is not.
situations where these strenuous forms of care, like say working overtime or what have you, they're not transferable? Let's say we're in rural India where adoption agencies aren't widely available. Let's say that it's a man who's snowed into his cabin with, 3 months worth of formula that he can give to this newborn. But all the while, he's going to have to be slaving away to make sure that the house stays warm, that he's making food for himself, that he's staying up at night taking care of the child. This is obviously very strenuous, but I would still hold that this is ordinary care for a child that is obligatory, even if it's not transferable.
Yeah, so I don't find that to be a particularly analogous scenario.
Well, it's not meant to be analogous to pregnancy. It's just meant to illustrate the fact that just because care is strenuous and not transferable, that doesn't mean it's not ordinary care that we should expect people to do.
I think that you can say that that care is laudable,
So
but
you would
it
say it's not obligatory.
I think that there are points at which it's no longer morally obligatory, yes.
Okay. So just
And
a
the
father,
question is,
just a father like slaving away to keep the house warm, keep food on the table for himself, hold back the flood waters or hold back, the blizzard, whatever, all the while he's caring for this child. You would say that that's not morally obligatory? I mean, oh, okay. I
right, and
I can leave that there.
so this is the point, is that we've managed to move very far afield of the question of, you know, is it in fact the case that when you have the direct and intentional abortion, right? Because we still have ectopic pregnancies that are directly and intentionally aborted, right? And I'm still waiting for a defense of the immorality of that act, right? Because that seems to be
The
what's required.
defense of the morality of ectopic pregnancy
No, I said
or
defense of
ectopic pregnancy
the
treatment.
abortion being immoral.
The abortion of an ectopic pregnancy being immoral.
Yeah, because that is a direct and intentional abortion of a living unborn human.
First of all, I would say that first of all, this is assuming that treatments for ectopic pregnancy are in fact direct and intentional abortions or direct and intentional killings of an unborn human.
Well, then,
I would
but
hold
no,
that
but
many
you
treatments
you
of ectopic
must
pregnancy aren't.
you
Why?
because if you are giving up uh, medicated abortions in the case of ectopic pregnancy, then you must also give up mifepristone because it's exactly the same in terms of
Well,
both the intent and the effect.
I mean, again, even if I could get into the weeds with methotrexate, but again, I'll just refer you to the paper. Like literally, it's like oceans of ink spilled on the matter, because there's all kinds of cases for and against. But let's just talk about
Yes,
a different form of treatment for ectopic pregnancy that's always legitimate, which would be a salpingectomy, which is when the fallopian tube is simply removed and the embryo is, will unfortunately die as a side effect, but it saves the life of the mother.
that's still a direct act that is done
Well,
with the
yeah, the
intent of
act. The direct act is removing the fallopian tube to prevent it from bursting inside of the mother.
The direct act with methotrexate is the shedding of the fallopian lining.
The
It's
direct
not.
act,
It's not. It's not
actually, the
kill.
direct act, actually, no, the direct act, this just factually isn't right. And I mean, fair enough, because I didn't understand until I was researching this recently. Methotrexate, actually, the purpose of it is to prevent cell growth. It's meant to prevent the cell growth of the trophoblast, which is the forerunner to the placenta, because it's the trophoblast that expands rapidly and causes the fallopian tube to burst. Now, this drug, as a side effect, kills the embryo. This is why I would say, or it causes the embryo to die, so to speak. So that's why I would potentially argue that methotrexate isn't actually a direct and intentional killing of an embryo. But even so, I can concede it, and concede even that mifepristone is an indirect killing, even though I don't personally believe that, and I could argue for that. But I could even concede it and just say, fine, mifepristone is removed from this debate topic, and I could argue separately that mifepristone is still immoral, even if it's an indirect killing. And that's what kind of sent us down the whole rabbit trail of bodily autonomy. But, it was relevant to this
Well,
discussion anyways, so that's fine.
yeah. So that's the issue, is that what I am building to here is that you have an act that is undertaken to terminate a pregnancy, not to kill, even though that might be the impact.
Well, so actually, I would say that treatment for an ectopic pregnancy, strictly speaking, isn't for the purpose of terminating the pregnancy. It's for the purpose of preventing the death of the mother. For instance, there have been cases where the doctors were actually able to reimplant the embryo. We wouldn't consider we wouldn't consider this a failure if the embryo was able to be implanted and go on continuing as an ordinary pregnancy. So it seems like the intention isn't to
So
end the pregnancy, even if it's a result.
I would like a citation on when ectopic pregnancies have been successfully reimplanted,
I
because
can give you the direct citation, but I would have to pull up Christopher Kaiser's paper. He cites it there if you want me to just cite his paper again.
I've got from BMJ, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with BMJ. It's a very well-respected medical journal, that ectopic transplantation does not exist. It's not a thing that is successfully done.
Okay, let me try and find.
Is it more recent than 2019?
Let me try and get. Let me try and pull up this article so I can give you the exact citation, and then you can examine it from there. Either during or later on after the debate, whichever you'd prefer to do. Let's see what I can pull up here. Ha tut 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 tut. All right, yeah. Writing in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Dr. L. Shuttles reports. Would you like me to just read the whole account, or do you want me to just kind of? Yeah, I can just read you the whole account. It's about a paragraph if you want. Did you hear me?
Sorry, I thought I had my push to talk down. I'd like you to put the link in the side so I can just read the article.
Okay,
I read
sure, no
I read
problem.
papers all the time. I can probably read it faster than.
Cool. If you're gonna read it now, it's on page 5. And I mean, you know, this is kind of a freak case, but the point is more that that it were possible for the pregnancy to continue, no doubt that's what doctors would be aiming to do. So it seems like the intention of treating an ectopic pregnancy, strictly speaking, isn't to end the pregnancy or to kill the embryo. It's simply to save the life of the mother from a hemorrhage that would kill her and the child.
Yeah, so this is a case study from 1980
Yeah.
without without significant replication or demonstration of validity. And
I mean, yeah,
I'm not I'm not
I'm
really
conceding
seeing,
that.
yeah, so like I said, when I say that that's not a thing, I mean like that's not a thing. Much like surviving rabies is not a thing, even though you can point to, I can't remember the young woman's name right now, but there are instances where you can point to it, but you also have people arguing that that was not a complete infection and that you have other competing cases.
Sure.
Without
I
actually
guess.
pulling up the original case report, which I would have to do, I'm not sure I believe that this is a real event that happened.
Okay, so I mean, I guess that's just um I guess look into that more, I guess. It seems to me like no, even it seems like you would have to make a pretty strong claim and say that as a matter of like scientific like law not actually possible to reimplant an embryo in
No,
not ever possible to reimplant an embryo into the uterus.
I'm
My
making
point is that the intention is clearly not to terminate the pregnancy or to kill the embryo because were that it were possible to treat an ectopic pregnancy while at the same time allowing the pregnancy to continue in a healthy manner, that's what doctors would do.
well, you could say
So
the
that's
same
not the
thing that
intention, even
if
if
it,
the outcome is that the pregnancy ends. There's
well,
a
you could
difference.
say you could say that were it possible with mifepristone, right, to collect the embryo and reimplant it into a willing woman, right? That oh well then that's what they would do, right? You could
Okay.
make that argument.
I could I would say that one, I'm skeptical of that. Two, okay, I can concede that. I've already conceded for the sake of the argument that
Right.
let's say mifepristone is indirect or unintentional killing of an embryo or fetus. I could still, along separate lines, argue that it's still immoral, but I don't need to do that. Once
Well,
again, I don't need to
I
do that to defend my proposition
I,
tonight.
I think actually you do need to defend that is still immoral. Because if it's not immoral, then your proposition fails.
Why is that?
Because your proposition is that it's always immoral to do these things. And if we eliminate,
Where in my proposition does it say that it's always immoral to use mifepristone
well,
to?
hold on. If we eliminate from consideration over 80% of all abortions, right? I think that that's an absurd way. Then at some point, it becomes an absurd way of defining abortion.
Give me just 1 second here. I'm curious about that stat.
So when I say 80%, what I mean is that approximately 80% of abortions occur before 10 weeks, and up to 10 weeks is the recommended time point for termination with mifepristone.
Sure, but
So
vacuum aspiration abortion can also, with dilation and curettage, is also often performed at that point.
it
This
is
is
often
kind of getting
performed
into the
at that
weeds, and
point.
it doesn't necessarily seem super
But
relevant. But
well, right. But so if you were to so the result of that would be you would say that that suction is immoral. Well, people wouldn't do suction anymore unless it was required because the medicative abortion didn't work. In which case, I think it would fall back under being moral because the goal of that would suddenly be the intent of it would be to end the pregnancy.
well, no, because it's clear that in the case of a vacuum aspiration, the intent is to cause embryonic or fetal death because the
Well,
means by
no.
which they're doing it is a form of direct killing. You would consider the procedure a failure if the embryo survived,
Well, no,
and
because
the
if
method.
if I firstly, I very strongly disagree because they're not considering the status of the embryo. They're considering its its location. If it's no longer in the woman's body, it's done, right? And so whether the embryo is alive or not is irrelevant. Likewise, if I was accosted, right, and had to defend my life, and I shot someone, Well, my intent is to shoot them. And by the way, if you're forced to use lethal force, you shoot to kill, right? Um, but that's not why I'm shooting. I'm not shooting because I want to kill them. I'm shooting because I want to save my own life. Likewise with the suction, they're not doing that because they want to kill the embryo. They're doing it because they want to terminate the pregnancy.
Okay, so at this point, it sounds like maybe you're disputing premise three, which is that most abortions directly and intentionally kill an unborn human being. So I suppose I can defend that premise in a few different ways. First of all, just again, the methods by which many abortions are procured, uh, seem to, just on the face of it, speak otherwise. They involve dismemberment of the fetus or the embryo
Almost
prior
none.
to the termination of the pregnancy. No,
Almost
not
no
almost
abortions do
none.
that.
No, not almost none. Vacuum aspiration, dilation and curettage, and dilation and evacuation make up
What
more than 20% of abortions.
more than
But
20%. So
that's not
let
almost none. That's
right.
hundreds of
But
thousands.
but when you have a DNC, DNC correlates to higher risk to the mother's life. Generally speaking, when you're doing a DNC, it's because the woman's life is at greater risk, which you would, I believe, you've already said that that is morally permissible,
That's
right?
just not actually true.
It
Women get
certainly
elective
is.
DNCs often. Sorry. Most
I would like to
DNCs
see
are elective.
I would like to see the stats on that because that's not consistent with the numbers that I've seen.
Okay. So, maybe I can send you that later on. I am aware of studies that, and just stats, probably even from the Guttmacher Institute, which can show that, but it would take me more than several minutes to hunt that down. So if you want, I can send you that later.
Well, so I mean, I feel like you're needing to defend that in the debate, right? Um, and you did decide to make a claim about the rates of it that were being used, that it is frequently used as purely elective, which is
Well,
not a number
so
that I'm familiar with.
again, I want to be clear. When I say that something is direct and intentional, I mean either as a means or an ends to, let's say the ends is, you're right, terminating the pregnancy, not killing the embryo or the fetus. I don't think that always is the ends, but I'm sure that sometimes that is the ends that doctors or women seeking abortion may be seeking. But the direct killing is still a means, so you are intending that direct killing, and I would still say therefore it's immoral. So, for
That's
instance,
likewise with
like
ectopic
I like I
pregnancy.
like I said earlier. Okay, so let me try and give an example again. My direct intention is to get $1 million. The means by which I will get this $1 million is shooting a 3-year-old in the head. Now you could say, well, my direct intention was to get $1 million. If I could get the $1 million without shooting the newborn in the head, I would. But I'm going to shoot this newborn in the head because that's the means by which I will get $1 million. That would still be a direct and intentional killing of a 3-year-old. Um, the difference, again, with ectopic pregnancy is that the aim is to treat the problem, and the means by which the problem is treated, in the case of something like a salpingectomy, is to remove the fallopian tube. The embryo happens to be in there, but that's an unfortunate side effect of removing the fallopian tube. Killing the embryo is not the direct means by which that problem is treated.
So you would say that if a woman decided to have undergo an abortion by by removing her entire reproductive system with the fetus inside and intact, that that would be acceptable?
No, because again, I could say that indirect killing can still be wrong for other reasons. But
Right. So then I don't know what the point.
I suppose in that rare case, that wouldn't fall under tonight's proposition, but I could still argue that that's immoral anyways.
Well, but then I don't know what the point of raising that with ectopic pregnancy is, because
Well,
you're
okay, so
the point is not that it's not direct, right? The point is that there is what you consider to be a valid reason for the action, right? So
I would
the
say that
directness or indirectness is irrelevant.
bringing about the death of someone needs to require an extremely grave reason in order to bring about their death, like the protection of your own life or the protection of like serious harm to yourself. Very
And
serious harm to yourself.
but we already agreed earlier that in the case of the kidnapping, right, where the kidnapper has no threat of violence to you at all, that you could still be justified in using lethal force if that was the minimal force required to remove yourself from that scenario.
If the kidnapper has no threat of harming me at all, then I would say that I would just use whatever minimum force necessary I would need to do to escape. So, in order for me to determine if it were the case that the kidnapper held no threat to me, he would have to be like not around or have absolutely no intention of ever killing me, in which case I could just use whatever force necessary to escape and then escape, and it would be immoral for me to kill them. If I
Right.
got into
But
a scuffle in the process of trying to escape, and this kidnapper is now trying to attack me because I'm trying to escape, now he is threatening my life, and
well,
it would be proportional
assume
for
that
me to
they're
use lethal force.
strong enough that they can prevent your leaving without by simply restraining you without causing any long-term harm.
Okay, so yeah, minimum force necessary.
The minimum
So
force
whatever.
necessary would be killing them.
Well, I mean, the minimum force. So let's say using lethal force that could lead to their death. That could
Sure, that's
foreseeably
fine.
lead to their death. Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
right.
again, then in that case,
So it is
yeah,
justifiable.
I think I could say that like intentionally withholding me from my right to freedom. Yeah, I think that that's a sufficiently grave reason for using violent force against someone.
So
I doubt we could
preservation.
argue that slaves like were wrong to like attack their masters in order to escape,
So
etc.
the preservation of your bodily autonomy justifies the use of the minimal effective force.
Okay, so then again, that kind of takes us down a well-trodden road that we've already cycled down. I
Right.
think we
But
might be repeating ourselves at this point.
we may well be doing so, but I think that it's completely relevant, because the point that you get to is it's not whether or not the act directly kills, because either way it results in the death, right? And we're aware that it results in the death. We know it's going to, and we do it, right? Or that it's highly likely, right? Just like if I, shoot somebody several times, it's highly likely to result in their death. But if that's the minimal force uh, that I feel in the moment is required to preserve my bodily autonomy, then that's what I'm gonna do, and then that is um, morally permissible. Likewise, we know that the minimal force to preserve a woman's bodily autonomy is an abortion, right?
Yeah.
Whether that
Okay.
be
So again,
medication or
I
not,
think
or
these are.
whatever it might be.
I think that bodily again. Okay, maybe something that I didn't tease out before that might be worth teasing out now is that like using bodily autonomy in this kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe unifical. Maybe I'm misusing that word in this kind of unifical way, as though like undergoing a pregnancy and someone forcibly kidnapping you are like the same degree of violation of bodily autonomy. Do you think that it's, for instance, like morally justifiable to imprison someone even though it violates their bodily autonomy?
It can be if their use of their bodily autonomy will frequently result in harm to others.
Okay. Yeah, I just yeah, so would you so you do think that bodily autonomy can sometimes be overridden.
Only in preserving others' bodily autonomy.
All right. For instance, the bodily autonomy of, I don't know, a fetus or an embryo. If we're granting that they're, a person.
Right. And so again, the question is, what are the reasons that somebody is doing it? So when somebody acts to preserve their own bodily autonomy, right? The bodily autonomy of the person they're using that force against is not considered. So when
I
when
mean,
we're talking about somebody who's going out and imprisoning people on a daily basis, right? That's just what they like doing. Okay. Well, then we say about that person, my reason for taking away their freedom, and I'm trying very hard to not say take them and put them in a room. Um, if that reference makes sense to people, then you've got it. But if that's what has to be done to preserve the bodily autonomy of all of the other people, right? Then that's what has to be done. But the thing is that the mother's bodily autonomy, she did not choose to be pregnant, right? So preservation of her bodily autonomy against the embryo is
yeah.
justifiable.
Okay, yeah, she not always chooses to be pregnant. Sure. I guess I could kind of make a broad sweep here and just like say that I agree with most of that and just say that yeah, I think that we do need that bodily autonomy should be considered. I'm certainly not arguing that like bodily autonomy doesn't matter at all. I hope that didn't come across tonight in the debate. But I would just say that like in cases of pregnancy and in cases of like say breastfeeding, I don't think we're talking about a serious violation of bodily autonomy. In fact, I would consider these to be like morally obligatory parental responsibilities that are ordinary for caring for the normal and healthy development of their child.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
mean,
I think
and
that would
so
just kind of be the broad
that's
sweep
the
there.
that's the difficulty of it. And the issue is that I personally have no issue or concern with somebody else having a different moral evaluation of the question than what I come up with. It's when it's attempted to be put onto others that there's a problem, right? And so
Well,
I
tonight
think
I
that it's
haven't made the claim that it should be
I don't know.
illegal, only that it should be
I
immoral.
understand that I understand that you haven't, right? But the point is that I think that there is a justifiable case to say that it is not immoral, right? At which point it should be up to the decision of the person at issue, right? If they think it's moral or morally permissible, then they should be allowed to do that if that's what they so choose. Um,
I don't think that thinking that that there is a justifiable case for something to be moral automatically constitutes like leaving it up to the discretion of individual people. Some people may happen to think that there there is a decent justification for the morality of slavery. Therefore, we'll just leave it up to individuals whether they want to enslave people or not. I
so
mean, again, I'm not saying you're defending slavery or anything like that. I'm only pointing out that I don't think this is a strong reason to say, "Oh, we'll just leave it up to the discretion of people."
so the thing is that it's a question of whether or not the case for slavery in that instance would actually be justifiable, which I highly doubt, right?
Sure. I think
So yeah,
more
the
my point is that in the
individual might
case
think that, right? But they would be mistaken.
okay, so sure, I think more what I'm trying, yeah, maybe I wasn't clear. More of what I'm trying to point out is that, and maybe this might be where I'll kind of like close out and give you the last word. In the case of both slavery and abortion, this is a high stakes issue. If the pro choicer is correct, pro lifers are needlessly oppressing women. If pro lifers are correct, then, intentional homicide is happening on a mass scale, and that's extremely unjust. I don't think we can just say, oh, we'll leave it up to the discretion of people. This has to be figured out one way or another.
I strongly agree with that, and the issue is that it is up to the people who are taking the let's say oppressive case to make that case, and until that's done strongly, I don't think we can hold to that.
I can respond, or I can just
Yeah,
I'll
no,
leave
go
the
for it.
last.
We're open. Like, if you want to respond, I was going to ask. We only have one question right now, so if you guys wanted to continue with open discussion, that is fine by me. I essentially this is your debate, so I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, I mean, we could continue for a little bit. People feel free to send in plenty of questions. I'm sure there's plenty of questions. Whether
Yeah. I'll put the
people
little
need
thing.
that.
I've been putting the spiel in the chat for a while, but I'll put it in again. We do the questions to the debaters in a different channel. It's a little bit different. We're testing it out. It might not working. It might not be working, but yeah, I'll post a thing, and you two get right back at it.
Okay. I would say that like even pro-choice philosophers probably disagree with you. Like pro-choice philosophers, like say Ben Watkins, for instance. I don't know if you're aware of his work, but he's over at Real Theology podcast, which is actually pretty awesome. He's an atheist. He is pro-choice, but I think one thing that he might hold to, or at least find somewhat persuasive, is that if we're asking if we don't know whether we are killing a person or not, we should probably fail conservative unless we have strong prevailing reasons to kind of disregard that. For instance, if I hear rustling in a bush, I'm out hunting with my buddy, I hear rustling in a bush, I don't see my buddy. It could be a deer, but it also could be a person, and I don't know. And I should probably err on the side of caution until I have some kind of prevailing reason to know that it's okay to shoot.
Well, I mean, so my commentary on that would be that the I do not debate the personhood of the unborn because I find it to be essentially actually it's not only that I don't debate it, it's that I I allow it in the conversation before it even starts. I probably should have said that more clearly earlier. Because the thing is that if the unborn are not persons, then there's no argument against abortion at all, right? So
Absolutely.
the only point of this is if we have to assume that they're persons for there to even be a conversation, right?
Well,
Um,
no, because you could just argue, hey, they're not persons, therefore abortion is
oh,
permissible. I think
sure,
that's a valid argument against the pro-life case. You
right,
don't
but
have to assume the pro-life case.
but I don't even take issue with that, right? And so I mean I just accept for the sake of argument the personhood. Um, I'm not 100% convinced that they do merit personhood, but I don't find it to be a relevant point in the conversation. I think that it should just be allowed because I think that bodily autonomy makes the point that again, like the guy holding you against your will is a person, and you're still justified to kill him if it's necessary, right? So
Sure,
that's like
I mean, yeah, I guess I agree. So, like, you could say, you could argue that bodily autonomy is a prevailing reason to allow the death of the unborn, let's say. But again, that doesn't sort of, I mean, I guess I'm just trying to, like, kind of push back against that idea that you said, like, it's the burden's on the pro-lifer since they're the ones taking the oppressive view. It's like, well, the pro-choicer, if they're incorrect, is taking the murderous view, so to speak. So I think until they can demonstrate a prevailing reason in favor of legal abortion or permissible abortion, the
I think that
pro-life side should be taken
well, I think that
as a
bodily autonomy
tentative.
is the reason.
Oh, sure, yeah, I understand that that's the argument. I was just kind of pushing back against that, what you were saying earlier about
No,
like
I understand.
pro-lifers have the burden.
My point um is that when a good justification has been put forward, then it's incumbent on that on the other side to actually effectively and convincingly knock that down before we start acting on their reasoning.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, at that point, we're both making claims, and it's time to dispute the claims. And yeah. So yeah, I agree. I thought, hey, I appreciate this. I actually, we covered a lot more ground than I thought we would.
I try to be economical in what I say.
Yeah. Maybe sometimes I get too much in the weeds and I use more words than I need to. So, who done it? Are there any questions?
Yeah, there is one. It's from ASIL, and it is seemingly to both of you. What about the psychological and emotional consequences of abortion on the person receiving it?
Is this an? I'm assuming this is an argument against abortion based on like the kind of like psychological consequences that it can have on people. Like, for instance, some women are traumatized by their choice to have an abortion.
Yeah, I would
Is
argue
is
the
that
intent
maybe
would
what they're
be
asking?
if you want to follow up there, ASIL, by all means, just tag me in the chat. But I would expect it to be like, do you weigh the emotional and physical, psychological consequences as like, is that a factor in the immorality or the morality, whatever the stance may be?
I would say that maybe it's a consideration that maybe women should think twice, but I don't think that on like something having negative psychological consequences makes something moral or immoral. Like soldiers often get PTSD from shooting combatants in war, but that doesn't make what they do more. That doesn't say anything about whether what they're doing is moral or immoral. We need to ask, well, why do they have PTSD? Like,
Yeah,
for instance, if yeah, yeah,
if you kill somebody in self-defense and you don't regret needing to do that, I think there's something wrong with you, but it's still justifiable.
yeah. I don't. I think it's consideration like practically speaking, say like, hey, maybe you should reconsider because women are often traumatized. But I don't think that by itself is a reason for or against it being moral or immoral. We would need to find out why it causes PTSD. For instance, like if a soldier like kills innocent civilians directly and intentionally, like what might apparently be happening against Ukrainians. I don't want to get just assume this. I don't want to get into Ukraine debates, but just a soldier intentionally killing an innocent civilian, if that causes PTSD, the fact that it causes PTSD isn't what makes it wrong. We need to ask, oh, why did it cause PTSD? Oh, it's because he killed somebody innocent when he shouldn't have. So yeah, that's all I would say.
I think we're in agreement on that the rate of regret or not regret is actually completely irrelevant to this conversation.
Yeah, I would say the only relevance would just be like for practical concerns. Somebody else.
Yeah, practical concerns, yes, but not ethical concerns.
Looks like someone sent a question in chat.
Yeah, I'm gonna say. Well, first off, thanks for the answers, gentlemen. I'm gonna say at this point, yeah, just tag me in chat if you have any questions, and I will read them off. From Dr. Breh, can you please explain what you consider constitutes personhood to both of you?
Uh, Crispr, do you have any thoughts on this?
So I would say that personhood is notoriously difficult to really define. I think that it's got to be an aware agent, at the very least. Um, and then it's really a question of where do you draw the line and why, right? Because like a dog is aware, right? A dog is self-aware. They dog acts and feels regrets and all of this other stuff, but we don't confer personhood to dogs, right? And so um that's obviously not sufficient. Uh, and so it's a question of how many other characteristics do you have to pile on to this to actually reach what we really mean when we talk about personhood? Um, and this is another part of the reason why I don't debate personhood when I talk about this, because defining personhood is really difficult.
Yeah, so I would to answer the question, I my definition of personhood is actually fairly simple and it has an old origin. I would cite Boethius here. a person is an individual member of a rational kind. And the reason to believe that this is the case is that it kind of best maps onto our moral intuitions about uh, different people who we obviously consider to be persons and different beings who we obviously consider aren't persons. So, human beings, any living member of the human species would be an individual member of a rational kind. Adults are individual members of a rational kind. Toddlers are individual members of a rational kind. Newborns are individual members of a rational kind. And it isn't arbitrary based on species either. If we were to go travel light speed, find another planet where there are Kryptonians or Klingons or what have you, these would be, presumably, they would be individual members of a rational kind, and they would be persons too.
Well, I mean, you don't
Now,
have to go to
point
the
out,
planet.
yeah, I mean, also Christians, obviously, they believe in angels and demons. They believe in God. These are individual
And
members
we were
of
promised
rational
no
kinds.
religion.
Well, this is just to give an example. I don't think, like, I don't have to cite these as real world examples. Uh,
Well,
sorry.
let me go.
Can I?
Let me say something just to, I think, possibly contribute to your case. I'm strongly moved by the argument that personhood should be extended to non-human apes, right? The other great apes, I think, should probably be considered as persons, um, based on what we know of their intelligence, their mental faculties, the way that they behave, everything else. And I think that if you do they behave rationally? Yeah, they don't have language to express it, but I think that they're if to use your terms, a rational kind. And
Yeah.
so, based on if that's the definition you want to use, then I think that we should extend personhood to gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, etc.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, maybe. I guess that just kind of that's a question for science to resolve whether gorillas and other great apes are in fact members of a rational kind. I'm open to it. It's just
I was just trying to
that
save you
I
from
just
going to another planet.
for I guess just to, or it could turn out that dolphins or elephants or parrots were members of a rational kind. I'm not yet convinced, but I could be. But being a member of a rational kind, if being a member of a rational kind is what makes you a person, this looks good for what we understand about human rights too, because that means that we are persons and we have inalienable rights in virtue of what we are, not what we're capable of. And
I will,
it doesn't matter whether we can currently possess our or exercise our rational abilities. What matters is that we're the kind of being that, when we're healthy and flourishing, have these really special and unique abilities.
I will, I
So
will
I do
point
think that
out,
extends to newborns and to the unborn as well.
I will point out that the weakness of that becomes that the people who kept slaves would have argued that uh, Africans were a different kind and were not sufficiently rational to be considered as persons. And so
They happen to
I
be
think
wrong.
they happen to be wrong, yes, but my point is that line of reasoning is actually still highly susceptible to error and problem, and it doesn't actually prevent the type of problem that you're hoping it will prevent.
Well, I think it does, because all we would need to do is say, well, hey, these are humans, so they do have inalienable human rights. I
Well,
mean,
but all they would have to do is say that they're not,
they,
and
as a
then they
matter of fact, would just be wrong, though. So that I don't think that this, like, sure, I mean, someone could, this does lead to the fact that someone could argue again. I mean, any definition of person is open to someone arguing against it in a very controversial and morally problematic way. But that does not mean that the definition is false. I guess that's what I would say. I mean, if you define person as somebody who is like an aware agent, like what you said, somebody who wants to justify infanticide could argue, oh, well, newborns aren't aware. Now, you could say, as a matter of fact, they're wrong, but they could still try to argue that, and maybe they could present a convincing case
oh,
to some
certainly you could.
people.
Well, the
So,
thing
I
is,
mean, this doesn't pose the problem that, you know, I don't feel the force of this objection.
well, it's not really an objection. I just wanted to say that in the same way that I don't um, defend abortion by saying that a fetus is not a person, I wouldn't I wouldn't defend the immorality of killing a toddler by like my position that killing a toddler is immoral has nothing to do with whether or not the toddler is a person, right? I can defend it for on other grounds. And likewise, my reason for wanting to protect abortion as a permissible act has nothing to do with whether or not the fetus is a person, right? Like these are not relevant to my consideration in a direct sense.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that a lot. But yeah, that I guess that would be our definition of persons, I guess.
Well, there you go. So far I haven't seen any other questions, so if you guys had any closing remarks or statements that you wanted to get out, say your goodbyes, plug anything. Not that this is going to be seen by a whole lot of people, but by all means.
Okay, I guess I would go first since I was the affirmative. I didn't actually prepare a closing statement at all, so I guess I would just kind of maybe I'll reiterate that, you know, I would say that it's always wrong to directly and intentionally kill an innocent human person. And if we define person as the way that we were just very recently talking about, then it would follow that the unborn are also innocent persons. And so any abortion that directly and intentionally kills the unborn would be seriously, seriously immoral. So that I think that on the face of it provides a case in favor of someone being pro-life. I believe that I'm pro-life not because I'm religious, not because it serves some sort of political ends for me. It's not because I want to, like, say, punish women for having sex or for some other strange or, potentially malicious reason. I'm pro-life because I believe in human equality. I believe that it's wrong to intentionally kill someone if they are a person deserving of basic human rights. And I believe in human equality. I think that any living member of the human family deserves inalienable human rights. Um, obviously there are considerations regarding bodily autonomy, but I feel like I've sufficiently pointed out the problems with bodily autonomy arguments in favor of the moral permissibility of abortion. Um, I hope this is some food for thought for you guys. Sometimes pro-lifers leave a very bad taste in people's mouth. Hopefully, I'm not a pro-lifer who leaves a bad taste in anyone's mouth, even if you seriously disagree. Maybe if you found any of these arguments a little bit convincing, you too could be somebody, you could be a pro-lifer who doesn't leave a bad taste in people's mouth. And yeah, I can I can leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Crispr, did you have anything final to say before we say goodnight?
Oh, hopefully my closing won't leave a bad taste in anybody's mouth either. Um, So, I mean, I feel that the permissibility of abortion comes down to the preservation of bodily autonomy. I think that by defining it as, talking about direct and intentional, I can argue against the directness and or the intentionality of almost all abortion, which would reduce the narrowing of this definition to effective absurdity by removing almost all cases, and or if we can't do that, then ectopic pregnancy would be a case of an abortion that is clearly morally permissible, um, in which case either either the definition is reduced to absurdity or there are clear cases where it is morally permissible, in which case the always of the proposition fails. That's, I think, where I would close it.
Sounds good. And from me, I'd just like to thank the two of you, Crispr and Baby Tate. You were beautiful and very calm in this debate, and it's a juicy subject. So it's nice to debate a abortion debate that doesn't get out of hand as they so often tend to. But thank you too, and thanks to our audience for sticking it out. And hope you join us on the next one.
Oh,